So some of us, and indeed I'm sure many of you, are currently experiencing an extreme case of the Mandela effect. Yes, the Mandela effect. Because Britney Spears really did have that microphone in that music video, you know, the little headset thing. And the Monopoly guy really did have that monocle, didn't he? And didn't Star Trek Discovery get cancelled after its second season? Right? Am I wrong?
But then CERN fired up its Large Hadron Collider and then transported humanity into an alternate reality. Now, Star Trek Discovery has done 5 seasons.
Yeah, I know. Many of you are watching it. You're like, what, Discovery did 5 years? What? I thought that ended years ago. Well, it did. I think in a Mandela effect, maybe. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. Anyway. Oh, boy.
5 years of Michael Burnham crying in corridors.
So, Discovery's done 5 years. And it's finished now. It's last episode's over. Bye. Bye, Michael. We're gonna see her. We're gonna see her again somewhere, aren't we? They're doing a Star Trek Starfleet Academy series, and characters from this show are gonna pop up in it for sure. So Michael, so we got 5 years of pew 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 in corridors, in between Michael Burnham crying, and people being told how amazing they are, just the way they are, and how much they've grown, and just a heavy discussion of feelings. So that's Star Trek Discovery over. The 5th season apparently was a bit of a MacGuffin hunt. A lot of people said that it was actually better than the previous seasons. High bar there, of course. And said it had a kind of an Indiana Jones type feel. It was tied into a Next Generation episode called The Chase. And actually, the last episode we find out that this guy is actually, and this was really contrived, right? So he's in a room and there's a few like props from the other shows, like supposed to be Cisco's baseball and Geordie's original visor, like why, right? How did he get his hands on that, right? And there's a few other things in there, right? And so we get the impression this guy's a time traveler, whatever. And it turns out he's not just any time traveler. He's Agent Daniels from Star Trek Enterprise, right? And it's so contrived. Like apparently they didn't think the show was ending at the end of the 5th season, so they modified the ending and threw in a few bits and pieces. And I feel like maybe this scene with Burnham and this guy. So it turns out he's actually Agent Daniels. And what he says to her is that his name is Agent Daniels of the USS Enterprise, which is a reference obviously to Star Trek Enterprise, only the fact that they got the registration wrong. It's not the USS Enterprise, it's the SS Enterprise. But, you know, it's Discovery and it's modern new Trek. So, like why are we even bothering to hold them to the standard of basic continuity, right? Anyway, 5 years of something called Star Trek that didn't in any way resemble it. Actually, it would have been hilarious if he'd said, yes, my real name is Mr. Fredrickson from Up. Because he looks so much like him. But, you know, it just... The idea that this guy is Agent Daniels from Enterprise, who was originally played on Enterprise by Matt Winston. This guy Kovic doesn't sound like him, doesn't act like him, doesn't look like him. It doesn't work for me. It just feels very tacked on and contrived, and ultimately like a cheap gimmick designed to sort of make a kind of a oh wow moment for the fans to go look it's Daniels from Enterprise. You know, they're just throwing in a cheap reference there that doesn't feel organic or earned. I mean, maybe if they had gotten Matt Winston back to play the role, let's say this Kovic presses a button and a holographic disguise that he's wearing disappears, and you know, and then it's real. Look, it's Daniels and Matt Winston, but no, instead it's like, yeah, I'm Daniels, and I'm like, yeah, sure you are. You know, I'm just not buying it. You know, it just doesn't feel believable. So the final moments of this Discovery episode. The episode is called Life Itself, incidentally. This is the 10th and final episode of the season, and the last episode of the show. And the last few moments are about as nauseating and overly emotional and overly sentimental as you could possibly imagine, or as you've come to imagine from this show, I suppose. And there's a lot of hugging and crying, and this got me thinking about something. It never seemed to be necessary for them to have these massive displays of emotion on the likes of The Next Generation or DS9 or Voyager. Did some characters cry? And yeah, there were tears sometimes, but they never had to go over the top with it, with the melodrama and with the sentimentality. It never had to become overbearing and just too much. It seems now that the objective of these writers in these types of shows is to try to, by as desperately as possible, like that the highest priority appears to be to get people to cry, and then that way they feel that they have achieved their goal of moving you. And but it's an appeal to base emotions. It's not an appeal to intellect or anything like that. And if you watch All Good Things, it's such a great series finale, and so is What You Leave Behind. I'm not as big a fan of Voyager's finale Endgame, but I still think it works reasonably well. Enterprise's finale was unfortunately not good, but All Good Things and What You Leave Behind are superb, and I think in particular All Good Things. And I think you can very, very genuinely get a bit misty-eyed when Picard is dealing the cards at the poker table. It's just a simple scene with his friends, and we get that beautiful overhead shot, and they start playing poker, and then the Enterprise flies off into the nebula, and they're not, the writers are not trying to force the emotion on you, right? But by these really over the top, gratuitous displays of emotion and people crying and all this sort of stuff. They don't have to do any of that. You got to know these characters for so many years. You already know what they mean to each other, and a lot of things don't need to be said, and they can be implied. And so when you get a bit misty-eyed at the end of that scene, or at the end of What You Leave Behind, or at the end of Endgame, whatever, it feels earned, it feels authentic, it feels organic. But with Discovery, it isn't. Because half the characters, you don't even know their names. Half the bridge crew, you don't even remember who they are. You know Tilly, and you know Michael Burnham and Saru and all these. Right? You know a few of them. The doctor's name, I forget him now. But right, so Stamets, right? So you know a few of these people, and then you just keep seeing them hugging each other and crying, and it's sort of like the writers don't know how to evoke those genuine emotions that the writers could when back in the day with All Good Things and with What You Leave Behind. So they have to keep telling you over and over again that the Discovery crew are a family and they really care about each other and they love each other. And then they hope that if they can just keep showing you these characters hugging and crying, that it'll be sort of like, the way, if some people watch reality television shows and they watch, like, I don't know, American Idol or one of those shows, or Britain's Got Talent, or whatever, and the way the judges put someone through to the next round, and then it's very emotional, and then the person runs backstage and they hug their family and they're all jumping up and down and they're crying, and then they interview them and they're ecstatic because they're going through to the next round or whatever. That's the kind of emotionality that they bank on. This is what reality TV show has done to television now, to even genre television, right? They're hoping that a generation raised on reality television shows that just are meant to sort of manipulate you in an emotional perspective, right? To just keep you watching. They're hoping that that'll work. But yeah, that's That's a pet theory of mine. I don't know what you think. But I did want to actually discuss something because recently Robert Meyer Burnett mentioned something that's been on my mind for a long time. He did a video on Star Trek, and his Star Trek rants are just epic streams and really very thorough and always from the heart of a fan who just loves Star Trek. And he said that a lot of modern science fiction, and I suppose Star Trek in particular, is very heavily influenced. The writers are very heavily influenced by Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. And I don't think this can be denied. I think this is absolutely on point. And it's been that those shows were, they were great in their day, but they were very, very influential to a generation of young writers. People back then who were in their teens, who are now in their 20s and 30s, or older, right, in their 40s. It seems to me that, like I say, a generation of writers in science fiction and genre television have been influenced by Buffy and Angel, and I think Robert Meyer Burnett is 100% on that. The greatest expression of this, I think, you can see in Strange New Worlds, where we get a lot of dialogue. Like there's a lot of back chat. They kind of speak like they're sort of millennial and Gen Z dialogue. But you also get a lot of irony, and you get far too much humor and witty banter it feels very Whedon-esque at times. And as a result of that, you get these junior officers basically being insubordinate towards their superiors, and of course, last year we had this musical, right, which was inspired by Buffy the Vampire Slayer's 6th season episode, Once More with Feeling. And it has a very Once More with Feeling kind of vibe about it. On Discovery, I think there was plenty of examples of this. So one thing that Buffy did very well, in addition to having very rapid fire, funny dialogue and everything, and constant quips, which looking back now, I kind of find a little irritating. But anyway, there's also a lot of pathos and a lot of irony. So the show could do, Buffy and Angel could do drama. They could do melodrama very, very well. And Discovery had a lot of that, a lot of displays of emotional diarrhea, which is fine for a teen-focused show about vampires and demons and werewolves and magic and all that sort of stuff, right? And a show based in a high school where you expect a lot of teen angst, right? But not a show based on a Federation starship with supposedly professional military people, right? Okay, and they're constantly having nervous breakdowns and emotional outbursts and crying and getting angry and behaving, really in a way that is highly unbecoming to an adult, let alone a Starfleet officer. So, there was always that. I always got that feel where you had dialogue in the episode that felt very, that's sort of like a line that Xander would say. Oh, that's very Cordelia. Oh, that's very Anya. Oh, Tilly is expressing herself in a way that maybe Willow would do. I always felt that about these shows. And so I'm sort of, the reason I'm bringing it up is like, okay, I'm not the only person who's thinking about this. I'm glad that someone else, like Robert Meyer Burnett, has noticed. So it feels like there's no depth or intelligence to these shows, and it's supposed to be highbrow science fiction. And Star Trek could do a range of different genres. Like one week it could be a comedy, it could do a lighthearted episode. It can do a western, in the holodeck, right? It can do the holodeck can basically take you anywhere. They can do a time travel story. They can do a courtroom drama the next week. They can do a more hardcore bottle-based science fiction story. Star Trek can do horror as well. So Star Trek can do anything. But ultimately, it is supposed to be a clever show. And it didn't always hit the mark, but for the most part, Star Trek was a benchmark for other science fiction series. And so I think there's something really wrong with the idea that a generation of writers didn't look at Star Trek as their influence for Star Trek shows, right? And that's what you should be focused on. You should say, what else is this? Here's this franchise that's gone on for decades. And that's what you should be drawing on for as your influence, as your inspiration, is all of those other shows and all of those other stories and hundreds of episodes and lots of movies. And there you go. That's what you have to draw on. And it was such a high caliber of science fiction for so many years. And instead, it feels to me as like the influence was actually something else. It was a sort of teen-focused show from the late 90s and early 2000s instead, from a completely different genre. And that's what it feels like. It feels like there was a focus on trying to have, you know, the quick-witted, fast-paced, clever dialogue, which was kind of laced with irony, laced with snark, rather than focusing on the quality of the storytelling and interesting science fiction concepts. Star Trek is supposed to be a science fiction benchmark by itself. It's not supposed to be a show that takes its inspiration from another genre, right, or another show before it, you know, or pays homage to something like that. It is supposed to be the show that other sci-fi shows look up to. And yeah, I don't think that's what Star Trek Discovery was. But there you go. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.